I'm Bob Woodson, the president and founder of the Woodson Center, and I want to thank Harlan Crow and the staff and everybody in AEI and for sponsoring us. I'm the president and founder of the Woodson Center, and I'm joined by my grassroots leaders from around the country. We have a cadre of about 10. Makita Lattimore, who's a Village Initiative in Kansas City, Gwen Brown from Washington, D.C., Melvin Anderson, Southern Dreams from Mississippi, Jesse Turner from Arkansas, and my staff, Curtis Watkins is here, and Beth Feely is over here, and Anthony Bradley is a new scholar of ours, we want to welcome you. Because we disagree with the doctrine of our opposition groups, we tend to dismiss very important principles and tactics. If we can extract the principles and tactics from the doctrine, it may be useful for them to apply to our own doctrine and produce effective results. In the cultural war, the left has been very effective in public marketing of their destructive message. We have not had a ground game. And I think about, in terms of how do we market these principles, I think of Ralph Nader, where Ralph Nader wanted to convince the Congress that we should regulate automobiles. He came to the hearing with a blood-stained, wrinkled fender of a Pinto and the weeping parents of a 16-year-old who was killed in a crash. And then he presented his data. People on the other side had 4 white guys in suits with charts offering data. And so we believe that if we are to win this cultural war, we have got to emphasize the importance of not just the message, but the messengers. Conservative emphasis on lower taxes, strong defense, and limited government are important, but insufficient and incompatible. That we are in a cultural war, and values are transmitted not by just offering free downloads on the Constitution, but it is through civic institutions in these communities. So the Woodson Center has, over the years, supported institutions within communities suffering the problem. For example, Chuck Swindoll said that I am convinced that life is 10% of what happens to me and 90% of how I react. If we are in charge of our attitudes, it is more important than the past, than education, than circumstances, than failures and success, than other people think or say or do. It is more important than appearance, giftedness, or skill. It will make or break a church, a company, and a country. So that the values of people are transmitted through the institutions. What the Woodson Center has done over the years, and it's the foundation of what we do, is that we use the story of Joseph from Genesis. Joseph, as you know, was from a dysfunctional Hebrew family. He told his father and his son and his brothers that he saw them bow down to him because he had these dreams. And you know, he was sold into slavery through the Ishmaelites, who were slave traders in Egypt, and he found himself in the house of Potiphar as a slave. But he became the best slave in the house of Potiphar, and he was very handsome, and Potiphar's wife lusted for him. But he had horizontal integrity and vertical integrity. He knew it was a sin against his God, but also a violation of trust. And so she sent all the servants out and came on to him, and he resisted, and she accused him falsely of rape, and he was imprisoned, where he became the best prisoner. And he languished there for many years. And then when Pharaoh had dreams that none of his experts, his PhDs or MBAs from Harvard could interpret, they remembered this 31-year-old Hebrew inmate, and they brought him up before Pharaoh. And he refused to bow to Pharaoh, so Pharaoh knew that he had integrity. And he told him, I understand you can interpret dreams. He said, no, I am only the messenger. I'm the vessel. He had become humbled through all his experience, and he said there'll be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine, save up 20%, first flat tax. And appoint an overseer. And he appointed Joseph the overseer. And the importance of this paradigm as a foundation of what we do is that if Joseph had become bitter and complained and remained unfaithful to his God, we wouldn't have known about him. Eventually, he was able to propose remedies that saved and rescued the Egyptians that enslaved him and the families that betrayed him. And so that Joseph is a powerful metaphor for what we at the Woodson Center, but if it wasn't for the good Pharaoh, a good Pharaoh is a rich and powerful person who's capable of dreaming bad dreams in good times and seeing beyond their wealth and influence, but also the ability to reach across racial and ethnic lines to empower a 31-year-old uneducated Hebrew inmate and elevate him to power. And so the Woodson Center has, over its 40 years, gone into low-income, high-crime communities and looked for two types of Josephs. There are Josephs like in Genesis who are in poverty but not of poverty. These are the people, if you say 70% of families in low-income communities are raising children that are dysfunctional, it means 30% are not. Those are the Josephs. So we go into these communities and look for the Josephs that are in poverty but not of poverty. And then there's the second types of Josephs that had fallen. They became predators. They became dysfunctional. But through God's grace, they became transformed and redeemed. And therefore, they became powerful witnesses to others in their environment that redemption is possible. So what the Woodson Center has done over the course of its 40 years is that we have promoted remedies from within the community by going in there and really listening to the real experts about how to reduce poverty. And they become our message. If we want to convince people of the soundness and usefulness of our values and our principles, we're not going to do this by issuing white papers or giving free downloads on the Constitution. We must partner with the Josephs of this world, whose actions embody those principles that we believe. Because people are persuaded, we believe that you confront an argument with an experience, and a witness is more powerful than an advocate. And so I'm delighted to be able to introduce you to some examples of our Joseph. We have about 2,500 grassroots leaders whose lives we've touched in 39 states, different racial and ethnic groups. And they are the real experts as to how to transform and redeem not only individuals, but whole communities. And we have endless examples of how that transformation occurs. But the qualities that make these men and women effective also makes them invisible, because they're not whining and complaining, they're not protesting, they're not looking for you. You've got to be like a Geiger counter and go in and look for them. And then once we do, we need to bring the good pharaohs. We're like a venture capitalist without capital. But we also know that grassroots leaders, as entrepreneurs, tend to be poor bookkeepers. And what venture capitalists bring to the table is not just capital, but also managerial expertise. So we know an entrepreneurial event grows from an action, a simple entrepreneurial event, until it becomes a Fortune 500 company. So what we try to do at the Woodson Center is take the skills and experiences in our market economy and apply it to the social economy, recognizing that, as I've often said, that entrepreneurs tend to be also C students, not A students. A students come back to universities and teach, C students endow. And so I'd like to without further ado, have some of my colleagues from around the country who have been shining examples of Joseph's that to me are the building blocks of a restored America. You cannot generalize about poor people, as the previous panel. There's three categories of people. There are some people who just broke. Their values are intact. And all they need, they use welfare and assistance as it should be, as an ambulance service, not as a transportation system. Mm-hmm. The second group, as the previous panel said, if you remove the perverse incentives for being independent and take the perverse incentives, then they will thrive. But the third group that is most troubling and the cause are the people who are poor because of the choices that they make and the chances that they take. Theirs is a moral and spiritual crisis. Giving resources to them without the precondition of redemption is injuring them with the helping hand. And so what our grassroots leaders from around the country specialize in category 3 of first recognize that people must be transformed and redeemed as a precondition of outside assistance help. So without any further ado, I'd like to ask our first panelist, Jon Ponder. Jon is from Las Vegas, Nevada, and he has this group called Hope for Prisoners. Jon can tell a powerful story of being redeemed from prison, where he was facing many years. So God touched his life, and as a consequence, he was able to establish an organization that has touched the lives of thousands. So I'll ask Jon, and then I'll introduce the other panelists. Jon.
Sure, thank you. Thank you, Bob. Good morning, everyone. I count it a privilege to be here. What an amazing time we've had over these past couple of days. So thoroughly enjoyed it. So by way of introduction, Jon Ponder, founder and CEO of Hope for Prisoners. And what our organization does is we work with men, women, and young adults that are exiting different arenas of our judicial system. So we work with people that are coming home from state or federal prisons, city, county jails, drug rehabs, halfway houses, transitional facilities, and the likes. And what we do is provide the supportive services to help the men and women that are returning back to our community, not only get acclimated back into workplaces, but we make sure there's mechanisms in place through partnerships that we built up with employers that once they get inside those workplaces, they're going to be afforded every opportunity to thrive and be able to grow and afforded every opportunity to succeed. We address the needs for them to get acclimated back into their family, which has been a missed mark in reentry since forever. It's like no one's ever paid the particular close attention to the men and women that are coming home, that they need to get reacclimated back into their family, the wives and the husbands, and particularly to get reintegrated with their children. So we work as best as we possibly can to ensure that there's a mechanism in place to help with the family reunification component, because everybody in this room can attest to the fact that if the family life is not right, if the home life is not right, then everything else in the world has a tendency to fall apart. And then on the back end of the process, because there's a long-term 18-month post-release component that we have, again, we want to do everything we can to ensure we're helping them to be stand-up leaders in the community with an overall goal of them never, ever, ever reoffending again. So the organization was birthed out of my own personal experiences. I was a guy who grew up in the streets of New York, coming in and out of the different juvenile systems since the tender age of 12 years old. I've been in and out of every juvenile system in the state of New York, multiple jails, prisons in the state of New York, in the state of Nevada. And then, 32 years later, I found myself in the maximum security United States federal penitentiary behind 50-foot walls. So coming in and out of the system all that time, I had made a whole lot of mistakes trying to get life right. But I was violating, going right back to the prison system. Until one day, for me, I stood in the prison cell, looked back over the last 30-some-odd years of my life, and had this unshakable sense that I know that life has to be more than what it was about if I was living, if somehow something was different. And I stood in that prison cell. I asked God to step in and turn my life around, and 100% he did. And when my life, And when my life got turned around, spent every waking moment of time in prison, trying to just understand, how to transform my life and turn my life around. And this is when this mantle got dropped on my shoulders to turn right back around and help the other men and women who were engaged and in bondage to the same things that I was in bondage to do everything I possibly can to untie them from those things and to help to escort them up to the next level of life.
Let me say, Jon, that you did something most unusual in terms of partnership with the Hope. Tell us about how many inmates, ex-offenders have you touched, and what has been the relationship with the police? We heard something about antagonism. Tell us about that part.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Since 2009, we've had the great privilege to work with over 4,700 men and women who have been through our process. Of those 4,700 individuals we had the great privilege to work with, according to the University of Nevada, Las Vegas Criminal Justice Department, who came in and asked us to move out of the way, and they wanted to see how good we were doing. And according to them, they determined that more than 74% of our folks were able to gain sustainable wage employment, right? 25% of those were full-time employed within 17 days after completing our process. And of those folks that we've had the great privilege to work with, what the University of Nevada, Las Vegas had determined was that only 6% of those individuals returned back to the prison system. It is a number that, thank you. It is a number that we're extremely, extremely proud of, but to be quite honest with you, we're not satisfied because my desire is not to lose anyone. But when people ask me all the time, well, how are you getting those kind of numbers? 75% of the people who are considered hard to hire, by every stretch of the statistic, they should be back on the prison yard. But not only have they not gone back, they're living levels of life today that most people only dream of. And that's how it is that we are changing the face of reentry. So how do we do that? We know that it's the training, because one of the things that we've learned was that the vast majority from the people from this segment of the population, they really do want to change. They have no idea how to do it. So for so long, we've been telling people from this segment of the population to come home and be a productive member in the community. They have no idea what that looks like. Or we tell people to come home and get a job, and some people from this segment of the population have never worked a legitimate job a day before in their life. Or we tell men to come home and take their rightful positions in the home as the fathers and the husbands that God created them to be, and they have no healthy reference point of what it might look like in here. So we take them through that very intensive training process on things that not only to be able to get a good job, but how do we maintain that job, and how could we lay down a foundation to help people build up this brand new life to where they never, ever, ever reoffend again. So it's the training, it's the intensive case management, and it's the mentoring. If you ask anybody who has ever achieved any significant level of success in life, how'd you get there? How did you get to where you are in life? If that person's completely honest with you, they're going to admit that they did not get there on their own. They had people that were in their life guiding, directing, coaching, push, pulling, dragging, sometimes kicking in the butt every single step of the way. We've had the privilege to train up over 600 men and women who have their boots on the ground that serve as mentors. Now, these mentors are pastors and leaders from churches across Southern Nevada, to leaders in other houses of faith, to business owners and business leaders, to school teachers, right down to the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. And watch the smile on my face. Ching! Where the sheriff has given us an army of volunteer police officers that are serving as mentors. Never before in the history of reentry, nowhere on this planet has law enforcement gotten this involved in mentoring and training people coming home from the prison system. And if you think about it, that is causing such a win-win on both sides of the equations in our community. Because you think about it, if we're trying to get men and women returning back to the community, get out in the community and never reoffend again, in order for us to be able to do that, we have to instill in them a love and appreciation and build character and a respect for the rules and regulations of our land. We found that something magical happened when we brought them in relationship with the men and women who uphold the law. And if you flip the coin around to the other side, what that partnership is doing is it's forcing law enforcement across the land to do the things that they sat around and talked about all the time, right? To view people that are coming home from the prison system who are truly fighting for a second chance, and help them to view them from a whole nother set of lenses. It's something that other police departments across the country have asked us to replicate. And the thing that we love about this, and I'm gonna put this in here, I'm gonna shut up. If you look across this country, right, there's a disruption between law enforcement and communities, right? And people do not trust police. They don't trust police. You know why they don't trust police? Because they're not in relationship with police. And what relationship could you ever establish trust unless there's life rubbing up against life in the spirit of complete transparency? That we have more in common than we have difference, right? And out of that transparency builds the relationship, and out of the relationship, then trust will be established.
And before introducing Ron, I know from experience that 40% of Jon's mentors of inmates are police officers. And as a consequence, the negative violent encounters between police and civilians is dramatically down in Las Vegas because of this relationship. But also Jon mimics that the counselors that surrounded him was the prosecutor, and the police officer who arrested him, and the judge who sentenced him. That's his team. That's the level of innovation that occurs in these communities. So thanks. Our next presenter is Ron Anderson, and Ron is Project Reclaim from Minden, Louisiana. Ron created a Project Reclaim out of his own experience of rise from poverty. Project Reclaim Youth Leadership Institute operates with the goal of helping our youth develop and demonstrate positive leadership skills in their homes, schools, and in communities. Ron is one of our A-team members.
Well, thank you, Mr. Woodson. It's a pleasure to be here. As was previously mentioned, my name is Ron Anderson. I operate the Project Reclaim program in Minden, Louisiana, which you've probably never heard of. It's a small town about 30 miles east of Shreveport. And what we endeavor to do in Project Reclaim is we work with youth primarily in poverty. And a core feature of what we do is leadership training. I've done some leadership training for our parish school system, and I noticed something. I noticed that most of the young people that came there, they drove. And then when they emerged from their vehicles, they had on leather jackets, and it was obvious as they traversed through my training and the other trainings that were going on the campus of LSU in Shreveport, that they were well-versed in education. They were the A and B students. Well, I had a contention. We need leadership training for kids that don't ever get selected for leadership training. So we focus on kids that come from dire circumstances. They need to learn to be positive and effective leaders in their homes, schools, and communities as well. So I want those kids that come from high crime neighborhoods, single parent homes, free and reduced lunch, which means poverty. They may have a tendency to be disrespectful or disruptive in the academic setting, and they just may need a little bit of guidance and support. And we take those individuals and we enroll them in our program. And when I go to the schools and the churches and community organizations to recruit our participants, and they give me kids that meet the criteria that I just mentioned to you, when we meet those kids and introduce them and their parents into our programs, and we give the parents the application to enroll them, the cover page on that application says, "Congratulations. Your child has been nominated to be a part of a leadership academy," because somebody somewhere sees something in them. So we don't operate from a deficit perspective with the young people that we work with, even though they come from dire circumstances. We look at them from a positive perspective. Case being, because the man sitting before you, the prediction for me was that I would die in the streets or I would end up in our famed Angola State Penitentiary. And as a teenager and a young adult, I believed that. And I'm well over half 100 years old now. I don't know if you can tell. But I still can't give voice to how it feels that that kind of destiny is something that is ordained for you, preordained for you. I still can't tell you how it feels to think that your destiny is that bleak and that cold and that hellish. So I want those kids that other people say, "Ron, you take them, I can't work with them." Well, year after year, we found that this happens when we bring those kids into our embrace, and we enroll families as well. And I'm fond of saying we don't just enroll the kids because, as you mentioned, if you don't impact the dynamic of that household, you're spitting in the wind. Something has to happen within that dynamic in that household. So we have parental engagement, parental education activities, and we engage those kids, and year after year, our outcomes are these. We want our kids to remain in school, promote from one grade level to the next, stay out of involvement in juvenile court so they don't end up in your hair, and we want them not becoming parents before they are equipped for such a crucial role. And year after year, we're either at 100% or the high 90s in each of those areas that I mentioned to you. We were rated as one of the 10 outstanding juvenile delinquency prevention programs in the state of Louisiana. And when we were funded by the Office of Juvenile Justice, even though we had sterling outcomes like that, they took our funding. And when I inquired as to why, they said, well, we're going to take that funding and we're going to put it in juvenile secure facilities. Someone somewhere had an idea, and as Curtis Watkins says, it's a policy decision. They had an idea that we don't want to invest in prevention. We want to do something with them when we lock them up. Well, this is what I did. I continued Project Reclaim as a volunteer, wasn't getting paid. But I wasn't going to cut bait and run because we didn't have that funding. I retooled what we did, and I kept those kids in our embrace. And then over the years, we were able to get funding to continue to stabilize us because I recognized this. As there were people that saw things in a black boy from the projects with no heat, no new clothes, one meal a day, Monday through Friday at school, which means today he would go hungry, and tomorrow he would go hungry, and then you learn how to forget about eating. If I could emerge from that circumstance, then I feel obligated to reach out to other young people that are going through similar circumstances. And as I previously mentioned, we don't look at the young people that we serve from a position of deficit. We look at them from their strengths. Every young person, and we enroll from third grade and we grow them until they matriculate into college or VOTEC or the military or they become gainfully employed. But if you're a third grader, an 8-year-old student in our program, you are called Mr. or Ms. And my moniker is Mr. Ron, and I'll take that gratefully because we want them to know this. As I mentioned to Your Honor when I was sitting beside her yesterday, we had just a wonderful conversation. The reason we're termed Project Reclaim is because we've got to reclaim some of those values and virtues that sustained us, like hard work, respect for others, character, and something I heard mentioned on this stage from another panel, a sense of communal responsibility. Our kids are engaged in giving back to the community because I had this harebrained idea that if they feel a part of the fabric of the community, maybe they'll want to protect it. Maybe they'll want to protect it and keep it whole. So I do what I do out of a sense, as you do, a passion of having been there. Thank God I wasn't behind those 50-foot walls, but I came close. I came close. But I'm thankful every day for people that saw in a young black boy things that he didn't see, that he was blind to himself. And I'm obligated to give back out of a sense of service to the people that instilled that in me.
Good, Ron. Let me say that we met Ron because one of our good pharaohs, who was one of our financial supporters, read about the Woodson principles and said, oh, I know someone who meets that standard. And he introduced us to Ron. And as a consequence, we came in and provided Ron with some training, and that man turned over a 5,000 square foot building so Ron could move his program out of his home into a facility. And I read Ron.
That's very correct. And my wife is eternally grateful.
And that's the kind of role that the Woodson Center plays with our Josephs. We try to connect them with pharaohs. We'll talk more about that. But our next presenter is Bettye Tyler and Marvelous Works, Inc., Jackson, Mississippi. Marvelous Works' mission is to reduce incidents associated with health and behavioral disparities affecting communities and disproportionate. We affectionately call her Miss Betty. And I wish she would share a little about her personal journey, too.
Okay. Again, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Mr. Woodson. As he said, I am Bettye Tyler, and I am the founder and director of a small nonprofit organization in Jackson, Mississippi. The name is Marvelous Work with the 2 L's, and that's the marvelous the way it's spelled in the Bible. coming from Psalms 139:14. For I am fearfully and wonderfully made, marvelous are thy works, and that my soul knoweth right well. I had to know that in order for me to transition from the place of disparity in my own personal life that I was. I've been working in this field for the last 30 years. I've been in recovery from substance abuse for the last 31 and a half years. And when I was in the treatment center, I was so angry and full of all of the fear and confusion and all the other things associated with an addiction, and mine especially because I graduated in the top 5 percentile of my class, president of the student body, president of the National Honor Society, president of the Spanish Club, cheerleader, some of the most likely to succeed type of things, and I ended up in drug addiction. So when I got there, I was angry and about to get thrown out of the treatment center, and there was this one doctor, he came to me and he asked me, he says, "Betty, how can we help you?" And that compassion, I heard that and I felt that, because underneath all that anger, it really wasn't anger. It was fear, shame, guilt, humiliation, demoralization, all those other things, and I masked it with the superficial anger because you couldn't see just how vulnerable and pitiful I was. So after completing treatment, and I remember this, we were in treatment and the TV station came in and they interviewed everybody. And of course, I was naturally trying to stay back and didn't want to be in front of a camera into that thing. And all of the ladies that they interviewed, all of them said that they wanted to be counselors. Well, in my mind, I didn't want to be a counselor. I just didn't want to do drugs anymore, and I wanted to figure out how to get my money back. I didn't want any part of that other stuff. And fortunately, I was the one that became a counselor. And I started with this agency, and I went into the prison system. And I kind of worked my way up through the ranks from starting out as secretary into outreach worker, counselor, primary counselor, manager of the program, clinical supervisor, those kind of things. But when I went into the prison system and I had this, I never forgot that question that the doctor asked me in the treatment center. So that was the modality that I determined that I would reach these female offenders. And one of the wardens had spoken to me and she said, "Betty, they like you so well and they trust you, but you don't have to tell them all of that. You don't have to tell them about yourself." And I said, "Yeah, but I do. I do have to be transparent because that transparency is what gained that trust. And also, I had to be a witness because if they can see this pitiful something flourish from the cocoon of pain and desperation into a flourishing of a butterfly, then they can do that too." So the wardens began to buy into it. And after I left the prison system and continued to do the work in other organizations in different positions, then they actually had me to come back and train their staff because their staff was not able to connect with the offenders the way they thought that I had effectively connected with them, and which I had. So I went back and did a lot of staff development training and those kinds of things. And in my work, I decided to do marvelous work because once those females left the system, they talked about all the data associated with the recidivism and all those kinds of things. But it wasn't focusing on the inmates that didn't necessarily not reoffend, but was not rearrested or didn't come back into the system. Because that whole group was out there. They were still stagnated. They was caught up in that mindset of prison mentality. They were not elevating, they were not surviving, but they were not reoffending and coming back into the prison. So that's when I decided I need to be a catalyst for that. And as Mr. Woodson talked about, a lot of these grassroots programs and projects, we don't have the money or the managerial skills. I had clinical skills. You know, I had those. So I decided what I would do would be a catalyst. I'll go to MDOC, the deputy commissioner, and I would talk to them and I said, look, this is what, allow me to come in and do this needs assessment. And then once I identify those needs, then I go back and allow me to come in and develop a curriculum, something that's going to bridge this, that's going to assist in not only decreasing the recidivism numbers, but increasing the sustainability, the responsible lifestyle, and mental health, the holistic wellness approach. Because women and the female offender is my target population. That's because the same as Mr. Anderson and Mr. Ron and
John.
Yes. It's just by the grace of God that I didn't do prison time. It was not because I didn't do the things or some of the acts that a lot of the females actually that I was serving. They were in prison doing time for some of the actual crimes that I committed. And it was by the grace of God that I just didn't do, I wasn't in prison. So, you know, guys say, you know, no, I didn't clean you up to sit back and cross your legs, you piece of dirt, you get busy. Yeah. And those are the spiritual principles that the marvelous work is founded on. First, we go within and you know, we teach us resilience, and we get them back to the place that they need to be addressing those deficits. Females are affected by so many issues. They are traumatized. I was traumatized. There's so much traumatization in not the drug addiction, not the criminality, but just being a female in general. A lot of the females come in have lost their children, and they attempt to regain custody of the children, but as Mr. Ponder said, they don't still know how to be a parent. They don't know how to raise the kids. We can walk them through all the processes, all the way through Child Protective Services, stand with them in court, get those parental rights reinstated, and then within 6 to 9 months, those those kids are gone again because they don't have the fundamental training to be a mother. The nurturing is not there. They bore children, and most of them bore children doing active addiction. Therefore, they didn't have time to do a nurturing and abundance with their children. So, you know, we do all that, and on the back end, once they become self-sustainable, that responsible citizen, then you have a chore, and that's to give back. That's altruism. That's a strong part of our curriculum, of our program. No matter what who the population is, whether the youth, the teens, we call them at promise. A lot of people term it at-risk kids. We call them at promise at the Woodson Center. Whatever population we serve, ultimately, when we start the project, ultimately you will give back in some fashion. Therefore, back to what I was initially saying, I didn't have to have a lot of overhead. I didn't have to have a facility. There are so many in-kind donations out there that provide not only the facility, transportation for me to take them on their trips, and even the population themselves. They have the community stew pot with the summer youth program, the Ed Promise kids, all over the city of Jackson. All I need to do is go in with my services, get the kids and my women, the offenders, as a buy-in to what it is that I'm saying. Go within yourself, stand up in yourself, become that person that God created you to be, and then give back. So therefore, also, I don't have to have this complete large staff, because guess what? Once they're trained to give back, then they take the torch and go on.
Thank you, Betty. And our next presenter is Sylvia Bennett-Stone. She's our Woodson Center's National Director of Voices of Black Mothers United, a project of the Woodson Center, and it empowers black mothers who've lost children to homicide. and Sylvia will give a little her background and just what we've done.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thank you, Mr. Woodson. And again, I will echo, this has been a lovely, lovely program. I've learned so much and met so many wonderful people. Again, I'm Sylvia Bennett-Stone, Director of Voices of Black Mothers United. I tell everyone I live in Alabama. I'm from Long Island, New York. I live in Alabama and work out of DC with the Woodson Center. So I'm a little bit all over the place and I love it. To share a little of my background, in Alabama, I have a grassroots organization, nonprofit, where we work with juvenile offenders. And since 1997, we utilized the court system, got the offenders and gave them programs instead of incarceration. And we had to change the heart of that young person, opposed to locking them up and nothing ever changes. They're still gonna get out and go home and be hungry. They're still gonna go out, go home and be raped. All of those things, but opposed to them going into incarceration, we work with them outside of it. And I thought I was doing all the right things, single mother, raising 2 children, and raising bonus children because of my children, bringing children home, and all of the above of what is traditional in a Black family in a Black neighborhood. We are the leaders in our communities, the Black mothers. We are the candy lady. We are the confidant. We are the disciplinary. You know, in our day, you just didn't do things and thought you was gonna get away with it because the neighbor saw you.
Yes.
And the neighbor disciplined you. So that's what I strive to be. And just a good Christian woman raising my children with Christian values in the church. July 4th, 2004, my daughter, her girlfriend went to the gas station, get gas. And the girls were caught in a crossfire of guys shooting at each other. The bullet went through my daughter's body and lodged in the heart of her girlfriend, and both girls died. I got the phone call and thought, no, there's absolutely no way. Not my child. And we all say that, not my child. But it's happening so prevalent now that we no longer can just really say that. We have to be active in making some changes. But anyway, I was met at the hospital and it was my child. And things as I once knew it was never the same. My whole life changed. And I had to figure out the new normal in our lives. In doing that, there's no roadmap. You know, when we carry a child as women, 9 months, there are people that share, oh, this is gonna be the kick part, this is gonna be this part. So you have people that share that roadmap with you. And then you have the doctors that tell you about labor, but you don't have anyone to tell you how to survive bearing your child. So in lieu of that, I went on the search to figure it out. But on this search, I found there was thousands of other mothers, just like myself, trying to figure it out. The one thing I knew for sure, and that was to hang on to the promises in the Word of God. I knew that. That's what saved me from dying. Statistically, 25% of parents die within the first 10 years of losing a child. 92% of marriages fail. 92. So you're destroying a whole community, families. You just don't take that child, you take it all. The devil comes in to steal, kill, and destroy. And that's what this thing is designed to do. But we had to come together and figure this out. What do? And being a grassroots member of the Woodson Center, I came on a call one day, and Mr. Woodson said, "Where you been?" You know, and I shared, Mr. Woodson, I lost my daughter. But the thing I'm mostly frustrated with is that people don't want to hear about the thousands of Black kids' lives that are being lost and bringing real solutions to our communities. They only want to go up in arms if there's a cop killing. And those are very few and far between compared to 10,000 of our children dying on the street. And a lot of them are innocently dying, being caught in crossfires, such as my daughter, Crystal. Mr. Woodson said, "You know what? You're absolutely right. And we need to give you all a national platform." And was born out of that my gratefulness to the Woodson Center, to Mr. Woodson, to give 22 mothers in 22 states with thousands of mothers that they mentor and they help through the process, the voice to stand together. But not only are we speaking for our children, we're speaking up for our communities. We're saying things that people don't want to say out loud. We were the first ones to say we do not support defunding of police. Because see, when you pave Black Lives Matter down the street where Black lives don't live and they can't see that they matter, but you put $100,000 in a road, but you won't put that money into a job, that's a problem. We put people over policies. We work with the people in the community. I have mothers who's lost their children and know that the necessity of changing the lives of these young men and women who are feeling so hopeless in their lives that they will willingly and openly take the life of someone else. We have these mothers who go into the prisons, mentor, love, and forgive those, they can forgive them. And if we can do that, we can band together and make these changes. If I can forgive the one that killed my Crystal Joy, then why can't we come together as a people, not as Black, not as white, but as a people, to love on our communities and to love the people to make those changes.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're witnessing and listening to the testimony of America's new patriots. They are antibodies, and collectively they represent an immune system. That's why it's important to support those within those communities. That healing has to occur within. We must take race off of the table. We won't argue it off the table. We must replace it with something of superior value. and the salvation of our children represents that superior value. Sylvia has come together with two other groups of mothers.
Yes.
And that is mothers from Silicon Valley who are losing their children 6 times the national average, teenagers in Silicon Valley among affluent white men. In Appalachia, the leading cause of death is prescription drugs. Sylvia, we sponsored a consortium of those mothers, moderated by Frank Luntz, where they shared the common ground that they occupy. Because, I'm sorry, Sylvia, go ahead.
What we did, we showed the world that we're all bound by the same pain. We may have lost our children under different circumstances, but they all are woven together in some way or another. The opioids can lead to violence. The suicide can lead to violence because of a mental health issue. I have one mother in South Carolina. Her son had mental health issues and was threatening to commit suicide. She called the police. And this is how we can change things. And I'm gonna share this story. This is how we can change things. She called the police. The police handled her son as a criminal when they approached him. He ended up shooting himself in the head in her driveway in front of the police. But she just didn't let that happen to another mother. She went back to that police officer that handled it wrong, got together with him, and wrote up how to handle these mental health issues. Now that police officer is training other police officers. This is the work that we have to do. It's not a matter of a choice. It's a have to. And these are mothers from all walks of life, all levels of income.
Right.
But we're bound by the same pain.
We have time for questions. Yes.
Not really a question. I just feel compelled to comment to say you all are doing God's work, and please don't stop. In my short life, I've experienced in one way or other many of the things that you all have expressed that you're working on in such a passionate and important way. You are, as I suggested on my panel yesterday, sprinkling that special sauce, those ingredients for that special sauce that's going to uplift not just Black Americans, but all Americans who are disadvantaged in this country. And I appreciate what you're doing. I work at the national level to try to get government out of your way. I try to get corporate America out of your way and to prevent those unintended consequences that they create for our communities. But by doing that, I could create a void. And if you're not there to fill that void, to keep working on the ingredients and putting the ingredients into that special sauce to uplift those, those communities, builders like me at the national level really aren't really doing much good at all. So thank you so much. You're doing God's work. You really are the epitome of what President Truman said, and that is, you can do a lot of good if you don't care who gets the credit. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. We really appreciate that because one of the ways that you fight back against the naysayers that are trying to destroy this nation in the name of social justice for Blacks is to give a voice to those in whose name they say they are acting. And you can undermine the moral authority of them when the people who they say they are protecting say they don't represent us. And that's why the voices of grassroots leaders are speaking independently in support of American values. It is the foundation of this nation's virtues and values that enable this transformation to occur. America is a nation of redemption. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yes, thank you, everyone. My question is for Mr. Ponder. In California, where I'm from originally, we're coming to 20 plus years since three strikes, and I'm aware, I have a family member who just this past year just got back out. So my question is, do you have particular advice for individuals who are older? So let's say in their 60s, there are people who are now in their 60s who are coming out of three strikes. Any particular advice for them that may be different from those who are more in terms of the prime of their lives?
Right, and that's a great question. Reentry is reentry. I believe that if you're 22 years old and getting out of the prison system, or if you're 60 years old, right, you're facing some of the same challenges. The thing that we encourage folks at whatever age that is try to find, the older folks, try to find what that passion is, right? What's something that you're passionate about doing, and then seek out the training to help be able to move you in that proper direction. And I think that one of the things in the area of employment, right? In our organization right now, we're sitting on more jobs than we can fill right now, because looking back, starting out 10 years ago, partnering with employers and getting them to hire formerly incarcerated people, right? The thing that we've learned that the majority of employers are not willing to hire formerly incarcerated people. They're not willing to hire a project. So when we can train and equip at whatever age to help them to be a tremendous asset and not a liability to that business, then that increases the probability of them being full-time employed. So seek out the training. The number one thing, is seek out mentors that are in their life. Surround yourself with people that are getting the results that they want to get out of life.
Okay. Star.
Thank you, Bob. Incredible panel. And as you know, I work in welfare reform and all related issues, and the passion is to remove the barriers over the nonprofits, angels that are doing this incredible work. What would any of you say is a major barrier that we were not able to get in the last round of welfare reform, even though there was a charitable choice initiative? What is something that you would say, if this weren't a policy, I could do more?
I'm not so sure it's a policy barrier that we face. What we do face is elitism as a principal barrier. We tend to support people who are very smart on both left and right. And too many people as Michael Novak said, when people on the left look at the poor and blacks, they see a sea of victims, and people on the right see aliens. That what we must do is, I've discouraged some of my conservative scholars from continuing to do failure studies so far. The only thing they do is why the Woodson Center has announced yesterday that we established a Center for the Study of Resilience, and we are collaborating with some major institutions, because you can learn nothing from studying failure except how to create failure. But no one left or right of center ever goes into these communities and studies how people succeeded. Some of those things historically, you were talking about Bronzeville, Durham, North Carolina, all those. We need to know how people succeeded against the odds in the past and how they're doing it today. But and scholars need to study resilience and perseverance in the face of oppression. And so we hope that that will continue.
Well, the
Next
first part,
question. I'm sorry, go ahead.
let me just, because the first part of your answer was about resources, and when we put into law Opportunity Zone initiatives, it allowed for the resources to now flow into the 8,700 broken zip codes. That's on the business side, to develop structure for jobs. I'm wondering if there are anything that are hindering nonprofits, because they're in every community, as you're demonstrating, but they seem to not have the influence and the capacity to build. So I'm just wondering if there's anything that can be done with the data that's given to the policymakers so that we can change policies to make their job easier.
I just don't believe that the major barrier is a policy one. I mean, there are enough private resources. We spend $100 million in campaigns and whatnot, and so we're appealing to private contributions in the marketplace, and that's what I'm hoping. Yes, you had another question over here. Yes, sir. Here you go.
Hi, I'm Kenny Hsu, president of Color Us United. What you said, Mr. Woodson, was very interesting to me, which was resilience. And we spend so much time talking about Black failure. And I just remember the Moynihan Report, right? And the study of the Black family and how Daniel Patrick Moynihan tried to, if people actually read that report, that was almost the origin of the whole notion of systemic racism, because he blames the decline of the Black family that leads to these various cultural problems on this morass of systemic racism that justifiably occurred in the United States before then. But it's just this report of failure and failure and failure. And what startles me about that is that if we actually take a look at the story of Black Americans in this country, it is a story of incredible resilience.
That's right.
And incredible success. The fact that in spite of all of this discrimination and Jim Crow, that Black Americans could establish these two-parent family structures and rise up in income and even create prosperity for themselves and the country now, and become some of the nation's leading entrepreneurs in media, television, business, sports, technology, is inspiring. That's a story of resilience. And I feel that on a macro scale, we focus so much, way too much on failure.
Thank you.
And I wonder to you guys, what do you think in the last 50 years is the biggest macro story of Black success in our country?
Well, what we tried to do in our 1776 Unites publication that was a response to the 1619, we went back and looked at the history of what we did in the first half of the 20th century. That we in our essays, we talk about that when Blacks were freed from slavery, only 5% were literate. In less than 40 years, that went up to 70%. And we were denied access to hotels. We established our own, the Wallahaji in Atlanta, the Carver and Calvert Hotel in Overtown in Miami. We have a phenomenal, I was born during the Depression in 1937. But in a low-income Black neighborhood, I never heard of an elderly person getting mugged. Everyone had a man and a woman raising children in every household. And so what we need to do is, the great untold story in America is how Black America in the first 100 years after slavery prospered in the face. We had 20 Black soul-born slaves who died millionaires. These are stories that all children and all people need to know. Only in this great country could a group make the kind of progress that we've documented in our 1776. So we're just delighted. I guess we've come to the end of the program. I want you to join me in thanking my panelists.